The Minnesota Wild announced today that Kirill Kaprizov will be the alternate captain for the 2023-2024 season. We'll react to the news. Plus, what are some things that absolutely have to go right this year if the Wild are to succeed? All that and more on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our pregame content, our regular episodes, our postgame content, our live streams. You will miss out on all of it if you do not subscribe, so make sure that you take care of that before you forget. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we'll talk about Kirill Kaprizov being named one of the alternate captains for the Wild this season, what it means for him, what it means for the team, and why it's absolutely a great fit for the Wild this season. We'll also take a look at some things if this season is going to go right for the Minnesota Wild. What are some areas that absolutely have to hit as the season unfolds? So let's get to the big news. Kirill Kaprizov, alternate captain, along with Marc-Andre for the 2023-2024 season. And honestly, this one surprised me initially, but the more I think about it, it really isn't a surprise. And it's a great choice, I think, for the Wild, because what do we know about Kirill Kaprizov? Well, on the ice, he is one of the, if not the most important piece to this team. He is the straw, the cup, and whatever's in the cup for this offense. The absolute vital piece of what this team does offensively, what they do on special teams. He is a fundamentally important part of this team's success on the ice. What we have seen from Kaprizov over the last couple of seasons is him kind of transitioning more into a player that everybody looks to for what should be done on the ice. He is a tireless worker. His training, his work ethic, his skating on the ice, it's all things that a lot of different people, a lot of different players even, would love the opportunity to have as a skill set in their book. He has a rare skill set on the ice. And we're seeing him, I think, move into a player that is not just somebody that can score sweet-looking goals on the ice. We have seen Kaprizov add other elements to his game that have turned him into someone who is very worthy of being one of the leaders of this team. Maybe not the most vocal of leaders, such as Marcus-Foligno, who's always going to carry that component, but he is well regarded by everybody on the team. And I think this speaks a ton now to what Kaprizov brings to this team, both on the ice and off it. But I think it speaks to what the Wild hope that he can continue to bring to this team over the next few seasons. We've talked a lot about players over in Europe, such as Liam Ugrin, Danila Yurov, Marat Hustendinov. Names like that we've heard are going to be making their way over here, hopefully within the next year, and getting a chance to get acclimated to life in North America by playing in the AHL until they're ready to step up on the NHL roster. Those are all players in which it seems like Kirill has taken a particular interest in. Danilo Yurov, I think, mostly in that regard. And so you see some of the leadership there of Kaprizov wanting to check in on those guys, see how things are going, to help them do what he did when he came to North America and started his NHL career. And so I think that's a really cool part of the equation that's often with those types of players you don't necessarily see. But the fact that Kaprizov has started to take a vested interest in some of those guys that will be over here and hopefully contributing at some point down the line, that makes this a fun piece to it as well. But the resounding message from everybody in the locker room this year is that Kaprizov is more than deserving of being named an alternate captain, which means that as he does on the ice, players now are going to continue to follow. And I think one of the things that's been most impressive with Kirill since he started his NHL career is just some of the other areas, that you don't necessarily see. Puck battles along the boards, even just some of the physicality when players try to introduce themselves to him, and he responds now. He's not afraid to mix it up a little bit if somebody gets in his face and is trying to show signs of aggression, things along that line. He is now more apt to respond and is not going to take anything from anybody when he's out there on the ice. He's been in the league long enough that he doesn't have to. And so to see him add these little pieces to his game and be one of those guys, we think so often of Joel Eriksson Ek as being like the player that everybody wants to emulate throughout this organization, of a guy who just is a tireless worker, is just an absolute pain to play against while he's out there. Kaprizov is in that same category, just in different ways. Just ask Drew Doughty what it's like to have to try to chase him around the ice while he has the puck behind the net. Ask some of those longtime NHL vets who just have nightmares trying to keep up with him when he has the puck and is weaving his way through traffic to create these just absurd goals. We're seeing Kirill Kaprizov become a leader for this team, and that is a very, very good thing for Minnesota over the next few years, and whatever the future may hold for negotiations for his next contract. It's going to be very interesting to see how this gets furthered as the season goes on, but a very, very well-deserved honor for Kirill Kaprizov. Like we talked about in the offseason, I kind of expected that it would be Joel Eriksson Ek or Jonas Brodin, but honestly, I'm glad it isn't. It may hopefully be a sign that some of the things that we have assumed were going to be the case this season may not be as we thought. I mean, we'll wait and see largely in that aspect, but it is good to see the Wilds go in this direction for their alternate captain, because Kaprizov is certainly an important part of this team, and it's good to see him be part of the leadership group for this team as things go forward. So congratulations to Kirill Kaprizov, now with a capital A in his last name, alternate captain. Very well deserving. And hopefully that's a sign that he is in store for a monster season, because guess what? A huge season for Kirill Kaprizov is just one of the things that would help this Wild season go according to plan. We'll talk about the others as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. The ticket buying experience has always been a pain. Often you can't find enough seats, the prices are too expensive, or you buy your seats and you get to the arena and you're right behind a pillar or you have obstructed view and you just don't end up having a great time. Well, Game Time is here to take all of that worry about buying tickets even the same day and throw it right out the window. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So make sure that you don't waste another opportunity to go see your favorite team in action or just go see your favorite band. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers coming up for you tomorrow, we will talk to Zach Zeman as we get a sense of what the October schedule looks like for the Minnesota Wild with predictions. And we will do some bold predictions for the season as well. Some hot takes, some spicy takes. And the spicier the take, the more of this that I end up having to eat throughout the course of the show. So that should be fun. Make sure you tune in for that tomorrow. I think it'll be a two-parter, so we'll have bonus episodes for you coming up tomorrow here on Locked On Wild. So we're going with the premise today of the Wild season, if blank goes well, will be a success. And from a statistical standpoint, we've talked a lot about what happens with the first line, what happens with the second line. And so I don't want to go the easy route here. And I don't want to go with obvious ones like, well, if nobody gets injured. That's obviously something that is going to help this team be good if everybody stays healthy. So the one that I want to really zero in on is the third line. And if the third line, not only from an offensive perspective, but from a defensive perspective as well, because your top line is pretty much offense first. There's a little bit of defense to the second line with guys like Eriksson Ek and Matt Boldy on that trio. So there is the capability to play a little more defensively on the second line. But your third line is going to be the instance in which you see it flip to more defense, and offense will be would be happy with whatever we get. If the third line of Freddie Gaudreau, Marcus Foligno, and Marco Rossi can gel quickly and provide a complementary spark, offense and defense, that's going to be a huge bonus for this team. We've talked about the fourth line a lot. We've talked about Brandon Duhaime, Connor Dewar, and Pat Maroon a lot. I'm excited to see what that group can do because I think that is going to be a fourth line that gives a lot of people problems. The third line has been a huge wild card for this team since we kind of started to put the pieces together as to what that would look like. Preseason results are preseason results, but we do have to acknowledge the fact that Freddie Gaudreau, Marcus Foligno, and Marco Rossi have done some good things together. And while on paper, it may not seem like a combination that makes sense, I know we have spoken at length about trying to give Rossi some playmakers to kind of help get his confidence up early on in the season to where he's not pressing nearly as much if the offense isn't working. But the weight that Rossi has added, the poundage that Rossi has added is noticeable. And so if he can follow the lead of the likes of Marcus Foligno and Freddie Gaudreau and provide some ability for that third line to just kind of throw people off. I don't know that we need the grief line reincarnated, but a third line that can just act as a stick in a bicycle tire, like the spokes of a bicycle tire, to where you're going to throw people off to where they may recover. It may take them the rest of the game. They may get frustrated, you name it. And so if that third line can provide some of that, and we also see Freddie Gaudreau continue his offensive improvements as he gets more time at the NHL level. Again, let's not forget that before Freddie Gaudreau came here, he had like 2 seasons of NHL playing time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so we're still kind of learning what Freddie Gaudreau brings to the table. And so far, it's been a guy who is averaging, right around 16 goals a season. For a third line guy, that's not bad. And the days of Marcus Foligno being a 20-goal scorer may have only been 2 seasons ago. But if you can get between 10 and 15 goals from those 3 guys on that third line, that's going to help this team out tremendously. And if you see, Foligno throwing his body around, doing what we know Marcus Foligno is capable of without his game being severely impacted by injury, that's only going to serve to help Marco Rossi in the early goings, because I think the approach for Rossi this year is going to be different. He's not being thrown in to a top 6 role and expected to produce. He's being put in on a third line where he can just kind of take the lead, follow the lead of guys like Freddie Gaudreau and Marcus Foligno. See how things are done at the NHL level. He's not going to be facing top end players a ton of time on a game-by-game basis. And so if he can just start to stack good performances together, your confidence goes up, and then the next thing you know, you start to see some good things happening. We're just going to have to, like I'm going to do, we're just going to have to wipe the slate clean from what we saw from Rossi at the NHL level last year. It was not a good situation he was put in, and I think there was too much expectations put on him before the season started. And yes, he's a 9th overall pick. You want those guys to be productive, hopefully top 6 guys. But hopefully the fact that he is not going to be expected to do that to start the season will help this team and just take some of that pressure off and let him just be an NHL guy. And the fact that he didn't light it up immediately like Matt Boldy did when he came up is hopefully going to be something we look back on and say, well, Joel Eriksson Ek didn't hit it out of the park right away when he started too. And so that's the approach I'm taking. I am not going to claim to tell anyone how they should treat expectations for Marco Rossi. That's how I'm going to approach this season. If you have seen and are not convinced, that's totally fine. With the entire season in front of us, I'm just treating this with a blank slate and hoping that the results this season are better. So, long story short, if the third line is able to offer production offensively and defensively and just gel and look like a complement out there, that's going to go a long way for the Wild this season. Now, it won't go as long as the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the special teams units, which is another situation in which if those units go well, It's going to help this team out tremendously. And so we will finish today's episode of Locked on Wild talking once again about special teams. That's on the way after this. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Unfortunately, Vikings fans, as you probably heard already, Justin Jefferson on injured reserve. So what that does for the Minnesota Vikings offense against the Chicago Bears on Sunday, my guess is the points expected will be a little bit lower without Jefferson in tow, but there's still plenty of great players for the Vikings. Kirk Cousins, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and plenty of others, so you can still get your player props for this Sunday's action. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure you tune in for tomorrow's episode with Zach Zeman as we'll go through the entirety of the October schedule, and we'll go through some bold predictions for the season as well. And the spicier they are, the more hot sauce gets involved. So we'll try to keep them as spicy as possible and see if I can get through the episode without trying to dunk my face into the sink. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild. So we talked about the third line. If the third line does well this season and puts together a solid offensive and defensive season, that's going to go a long way for the Wild to getting to their ultimate goal, which again, this year is the postseason. Special teams is going to be a huge factor, but I don't have to tell anybody that. We know that that's been a problem for this team for the last few seasons at least. And it's funny because it stems from just some really key details. First off, on the power play, in order to set yourself up to score power play goals, you have to be able to enter the zone. Something that the Wild have struggled with quite a bit. Last year, it was a problem at various points. 2 years ago, not so much, because the Wild had a couple of different guys that were capable of getting the puck into the offensive zone. More reliance on Kirill Kaprizov in that area last year. What will it look like this year under new assistant coach Jason King, who is going to be in charge of both units? There have been some good things that we've seen with the power play through the preseason. There was, I forget the game, but I was following along for updates. It was one of the games that we weren't able to watch and was following along with updates. And Michael Russo tweeted that the Wild had one of those insane tic-tac-toe power play goals where they passed the puck like 4 times and they were able to get it into the net. And not only that, but there were also players without the puck that were moving around and trying to create new opportunities by not just being fixtures in the offensive zone at various points throughout the spread of the zone. If this Wild power play can do some of that, and I think the thing that we got to be clear about with power plays and penalty kills is because they're percentage-driven units. If you can avoid the huge swings like the Wild had last year, they had one stretch where they were just, I think, like 4 for 40 on the power play. And so even though they had the start that they did where they were above 25%, I think through the entire month of October, they did end up with a franchise record for power play percentage, which isn't saying much because they were like middle of the pack. If you can avoid those huge peaks and valleys and just be consistent, like if you can go from peaking at 25%, dropping down to like 13 and leveling out at 20 to consistently being somewhere around 22%, 23%. You're not going to beat the Edmonton Oilers, who were above 30, but the difference between being middle of the pack and top 10 is really not all that much. It's a couple of percentage points for both power play and for penalty kill. So if the Wilds can just be more consistent with both units, but especially the power play. Pulling up the numbers right now because I do want to try to emphasize this point. The Minnesota Wild, 21.4% on the power play on the season. And for them to go to 10th, where the Florida Panthers were last year, Florida Panthers were at 22.8%. So a 1.4% increase in successful power play scoring could get the Wild into the top 10. If they were able to increase by 2%, they get up to 9th, where the Buffalo Sabres were last season at 23.4. That's a 2% increase. And you could get to, say, a 3% increase, and you would all of a sudden then be above the New York Rangers, and you'd be 7th, just behind the Colorado Avalanche, who are at 24.5%. So again, it's not asking a ton. I think everybody just gets frustrated because there are so many instances in which this power play is just not able to muster anything. And so fans would rather see a power play unit that gets shots on net. And if you come up empty, at least you challenged. But if you pass it around the perimeter and are looking for the perfect shot, that is a great way to come up empty and to get people frustrated by not getting more than one shot on net per power play opportunity. And for a team that takes as many penalties as the Minnesota Wild do, it's paramount that they are rock solid on special teams. It is imperative for them, unless they change their style and become a team that does not take as many penalties as they do. Unless they change that, you have to really shore up both of those units. And it's more so the power play for me, because we saw so many times in which that first unit did their job and the second unit was not able to. So if you can get more even performance, just more of a consistent power play throughout the season, you can go, 2 or 3 out of every 10, as opposed to having like a 7 for 10 followed by an 0 for 20. Like, let's avoid all of that. And the way that you do that is by more puck movement, by more shots, and by just relentless attack on the net. Tampa Bay Lightning, a great team who just gets so good at getting up close to the net and just moving the puck around until they get the goalie out of position and just burying one. Do that. Do some of that to get those numbers up a little bit. And as far as the penalty kill goes, the Wilds did make the change from that more stay-at-home style of penalty kill 2 seasons ago that led to them being like a 60% penalty kill through the final 40 games of the season. This past year, they were infinitely more aggressive, which led to a bunch of shorthanded goals, which led to them with an 82% penalty kill, which had them, I believe, just outside. Actually, they were 10th in the NHL in terms of penalty kill percentage at 82%. And again, not even a full percentage improvement, not even 1% improvement on the penalty kill gets the Wild up to 4th. The New Jersey Devils were tied for 4th with Calgary with an 82.6% penalty kill. You get it to 83, you're in 4th. You get it to 84, you're in 3rd. And so it's not huge improvements. It's not radical improvements that are being asked for these units. It's a simple percentage point bump to get them up into those units that are more consistent and more successful more often than they're not. And so, third line, special teams. If those areas are rock solid this season, that should go a long way towards helping the Minnesota Wild get to the postseason once again. That will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wilds. Once again, we thank you for tuning into today's episode. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the course of the week. And with the season starting on Thursday, we are going to be throwing a lot at you, especially at Xcel Energy Center. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.